Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Whatever fantasy you've brought here, leave it at the door. There will be no money. There will be no place for you. My biological mother spoke as if issuing a dress code, her voice cool enough to fog the limestone of the grand entry. I had imagined this doorway for 6 decades, then Geneviève Beaumont in a silk jacket the color of frost pared me down to an inconvenience with a single sentence. I steadied my breath in the handle of my modest tote. The atrium smelled of beeswax and white lilies. Sun fell through a high oval skylight onto a floor veined like oyster shell. My reflection at 67 looked back at me. From the polished stone-silver hair twisted into a clip, the good navy dress from a Macy's clearance rack, the posture I'd learned behind a diner counter when a double shift was only half my day. Mrs. Hart. The man in the doorway. Arthur, the house manager, had greeted me with the kind of courtesy that is really surveillance. He had not smiled. He had inspected my ID through the intercom camera, then again at the iron gate, while a lens winked from a cypress like a blinking eye. Only when the lock clacked had the brass gates of the Montecito estate rolled aside. The Pacific glittered beyond the hedges. Somewhere water worked through a hidden fountain. Yes, I'd said then. Ellen Hart. Saying my name aloud helped. I'd repeated it again when Arthur took my coat as if the syllables could anchor me inside all that brightness and hush. Now Genevieve's words cut the hush cleanly. No money, no place. The sentence didn't surprise me so much as its efficiency. She had the face of a woman who preferred outcomes to conversations. Seated beneath a wall-sized Matisse, she appraised me the way people scan wine lists expertly without interest. I didn't come for money. I answered, keeping my voice low the way I speak to cranky customers before the lunch rush. I came for the truth. One of her eyebrows lifted by a millimeter. It was a beautiful gesture polished by a lifetime of mirrors. Truth, she said, can be expensive. I thought of the padded envelope that had changed everything spit in a tube, a number string, a family tree that exploded like firework branches across a website. I thought of the investigator Caleb Ortiz who'd sat across from me in the back booth at Benny's on Market Street in Akron, eating a slice of lemon meringue while laying out the names he'd found. Beaumont. Not just well-to-do. Dynasty. Articles. Foundations. Properties. A public biography glossy as a brochure. Caleb had warned me carefully. Ms. Hart, even with the DNA, they may not want contact. I had stirred my coffee until the spoon tapped the cup in small, sane circles. That ship sailed before I could crawl, I told him. But I'm still going to knock. I had knocked metaphorically for 3 weeks through paralegals and assistants until today a sliver in the calendar appeared. 30 minutes, the assistant had set her tone the color of a gray suit. 30 minutes felt like a miracle measured with a kitchen timer. Geneviève adjusted a pearl earring. Up close, the immaculate construction became more visible, the surgery that had tucked and smoothed the disciplined silver of her hair, the precision of a manicure in bone pink. She must have been 91, but the word that occurred to me wasn't old. It was armored. You were born inconvenient, she observed the way one might remark on a forecast. Clear skies, 58 degrees high winds along the coast. We had no time. We were building. The press, the partners, none of it could accommodate. Complications. Complications. I let my eyes travel to the window wall. The garden rolled away in terraces, olive trees, lavender, a glint of pool like a coin tossed into blue. Somewhere a gardener's radio clicked between stations. I looked back. You carried me, I said calmly. You named me on a line that probably lives in some county archive. Then you sent me to strangers and carried on. I don't need apologies. I want to know the shape of what happened. I want names. I want a few facts I can organize into a story that belongs to me. A flicker, almost boredom, almost relief passed across her face. You were placed at a reputable home. We made donations to children's causes for decades. We have no obligation to revisit the past. I thought of Frank and Alma Pike, my adoptive parents, who were never a home but a household warm-cluttered, sometimes loud. Frank had worked nights at the plastics plant and kept a robin's nest catalog on the porch. Alma cleaned offices and hummed Patsy Cline while she peeled potatoes. They had died when I was 19, a stoplight missed headlights drawing brackets around that absence forever. If Geneviève had made donations, they had not bought me a ride to the cemetery. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Where is Mr. Beaumont, I asked. Charles is resting, she answered. He tires in the afternoon. We were somehow already in the room beyond the atrium, not a conservatory exactly. Those are for shows, but an orangery bright with potted citrus and camellias in glazed jars. White curtains, a washed oak table chairs with the kind of spare lines architects sigh over. I could imagine the parties here, a string quartet near the windows, conversations about auctions, policy mergers. I still smelled coffee on my skin from the flight and then the drive along the coast in a rental sedan that thought hills were personal. You insisted on this meeting, she went on. We obliged. Consider it concluded. I stood. The word concluded had a satisfying weight to it, like the check at a well-run lunch. I smoothed the navy fabric over my hips, habit nerves, and glanced at the lemon tree nearest me. The fruit hung glossy and ridiculous, each attached by a tiny green hinge. Your gardeners are artists, I said. It takes attentiveness to coax sweetness out of a thorn thing. Her expression did not change. Arthur will see you out. The corner of my mouth kicked up despite myself. I came alone, I said, but I don't leave empty-handed. I leave with what you've given me. And what is that? It wasn't a dare, it was a curiosity sharpened to a point. Clarity. The words settled in the air like dust motes that only a certain angle of light can reveal. For the first time, she looked past me at the door, perhaps, or at something inward that required steadier breath than she'd allowed herself. When her gaze returned, it had cooled again. Sit, she said abruptly. I thought we were concluded. Sit, she repeated, not louder, but with a tone that suggested she was unaccustomed to repetition. It would be, she paused, seeking a word that let her be both patrician and pragmatic. It would be improper for you to leave without greeting my husband. Improper. The word did not belong to my life tips and late buses and discount prescriptions, but I understood its use here. Their world ran on forms that produced outcomes. I sat. While we waited, the house altered itself around us. Footsteps moved down a corridor. A door softened shut far away. A dog barked once, rebuked itself into silence. Through the glass, the ocean showed only a square of itself, but even the smallest piece had a way of making a person feel both pinned and free. I thought of my daughter Maya, the child of my one good marriage and the center of every calendar I ever obeyed. Maya had called last night from a set in Vancouver where the dawn light looked like glitter poured through gauze. Are you eating, Mom? She'd asked, because love likes particulars. At 38, she had wrung a career out of talent and stamina, directing when they wouldn't cast her writing, when they wouldn't direct her scripts. She was working, always working, and still she telephoned on Sundays in a voice that kept a chair pulled out for me wherever she was. You don't have to do this alone, she'd said then. I'm not alone. I told her, though, my sink held one coffee mug and a spoon, and the apartment over the pharmacy has a particular echo in winter. I had meant it. I had meant that I had myself and the habit of going on. She had laughed softly, the way one does when truth and tenderness collide. Call me after she'd said, no matter how short the meeting, I'll be awake. I kept my eyes on the lemons. The fruit gleamed like small suns. I had thought I would cry when I saw her, not Maya, but Geneviève, that some mechanism inside me would finally locate the whale it had misplaced at 6 weeks old. Instead, when she told me there would be no money, no place, nothing, I had felt a strange, steadied emptiness, as if the room had been stripped to stud walls and I could finally chart where the beams ran, where the roof truly rested, what was load-bearing and what was ornament. Arthur reappeared in the threshold. Mrs. Beaumont, he said, softening his voice. Mr. Beaumont is on his way. Thank you, she replied, and the thank you was entirely correct, timed, pitched, delivered, as if we were all musicians reading from the same score. She didn't look at me when she spoke again. Your investigator sent far more documentation than necessary. You signed releases I didn't require. You offered more than you were asked for. Why? So you couldn't pretend I hadn't, I said. That finally drew her eyes. They were a pale, difficult blue, the color of the sea on a wind-bitten day when the surface whitens and every wave carries a blade. Pretend, she echoed. I grew up hearing stories that tidied other people's mistakes. I brought you the mess. The mess is mine. I came to set it down in the correct room. She studied me, and for one breath I recognized the same trait rearranged upon two faces, hers and Maya's, a way of measuring that reduces a space to its solving lines. Perhaps blood is a map you cannot read until something terrible gives you the key. She folded her hands. If I tell you details, what will you do with them? I'll know them, I said. That's all. We sat like that, two women tethered by a story neither had wanted to write, until steps sounded again, a cane tapping wood, then stone. The faint exertion of breath a man disguises out of long habit. I did not rise. I placed my palms flat on my knees the way Alma taught me to, when the world tried to take my balance, and waited not at the mercy of the room, not pleading, not prepared to be dismissed as an error in a ledger, but simply present as if after years of hunting, I had finally come to the correct door and could afford to remain on the hinge. The door from the corridor opened. Ellen, Geneviève said, and my name in her voice startled me more than any other sound in that house had managed to do. My husband will see you now. I inhaled slow and steady the way a person does before breaking the surface of cold water. I turned toward the doorway, and I stayed seated. The door from the corridor opened and a man stepped into the light as if the house had measured it for him. He was tall once, Time had drafted an inch from his height and added a tremor to his right hand. A cane of polished walnut kept rhythm with his steps tap-lift set until he reached the threshold where the orangery gave way to the corridor's shadow. Charles, Geneviève said. My name in her mouth had surprised me. His and hers did not. This is Ellen. He studied me with an attention that was not the same as scrutiny. It had the softness of recall, as if he were comparing me to a photograph only he could see. The eyes pale as sea glass lingered on my jaw, then on the way my hair was pinned, as though that pinned memory to something older. Ms. Hart, he said, thank you for coming. The words were plain, the cadence careful. I stood because I was raised to stand when someone older enters a room, and because Alma once told me that courtesy is a kind of ballast. Mr. Beaumont, I returned. Thank you for seeing me. He moved to the chair opposite mine. Geneviève did not sit. She seemed to prefer height today, even a few inches of it. Arthur ghosted in with a tray and left us a silver pot of teacups, like small Bell's lemon wedges precisely the size of thumbnails. I don't take sugar, I said out of reflex, but thank you. Charles poured his own tea and left it untouched. The cup steamed between his hands, and for a moment he looked pleased to be holding something warm. We agreed to this meeting as a courtesy, Geneviève said. 30 minutes. Charles glanced toward her, not to oppose, but to register the fact of her sentence. I remember 30 minutes, he said to me, and a corner of his mouth shook free from the strictness of his face. An indulgence in this house. He turned back to me. Where were you born? County General, January 1958. I answered, I found the line on a microfilm machine at the library. It's a strange thing watching your life reduced to a row of type. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're congratulating themselves for knowing an answer before they hear it. And you grew up where? South Akron, I said. Then later, above a pharmacy near the bus station. I didn't add the rest. There was never a reason to catalog every address you sleep in, unless someone is trying to prove you don't belong somewhere. Geneviève exhaled a sound too refined to be called a sigh. Ellen, she said we didn't ask you here to exchange anecdotes about zip codes. No, I said. You invited me to be dismissed in full sentences. Charles's laugh came out as a breath on the edge of a cough. He lifted one palm toward his wife, a plea not to the content, but to the method. Let me, he said. Genevieve's silence was a kind of permission. He turned the cane between his fingers. I've built things that looked like permanence, he said. The first apartment building we purchased is now a grocery store. The second is a parking garage. Permanence is a comedian. I waited. That toned the confessional clip to fit inside a business meeting was familiar from 100 men who'd fallen in love with a counterstool and the way a stranger listens. When we were very young, Charles went on, we believed control was the same as prudence. We told ourselves a story about complications and how to avoid them. He did not look at Geneviève for this. We picked a tidy path and walked it. It wasn't tidy at all. The lemons looked unreasonably bright in the corner of my eye. I asked for facts, I said, though my voice made room for what he was trying to do. Names, dates, the shape of the decision. He nodded. There was a doctor, Mallory. The attorney was Kincaid. The woman who arranged the placement worked for St. Agnes Children's Home, Sister Margaret. I remember her hands strong as a carpenter's. We wrote a check. Several, in fact. Checks, I echoed. The word made a sound like paper caught between gears. To St. Agnes I added, and time opened in the floor. Bright tiles starch, a smell of bleach and talcum and simmered oatmeal. Names on the backs of photographs in looping blue ink. Marie waved at trucks. Bobby Goodeater. My name had not been on any of those photos. Geneviève touched the back of a chair. The gesture could have been affection if the chair had been a person. We gave where it would make a difference, she said. It is vulgar to itemize one's gifts. I don't know if she heard the edge in my reply. Vulgarity can be an audit. Arthur reappeared at the doorway. For the first time, his formality had frayed. Madam, he said to Geneviève, there is a Ms. Hart at the gate. She has identification. She says she's expected. She is not, Geneviève said quickly. She is, I said, and the steadiness of my answer surprised us all, me. Most of all, she is my daughter. Arthur's eyebrows revised their understanding of me. She mentioned a text, he added, and if I may, there is indeed a resemblance. Genevieve's resistance flickered not to yield but to calculate the public dimension of refusing a guest with a matching face. Send her in, Charles said, saving us several expensive phone calls. He placed the teacup on the table without clinking it against the saucer and folded his hands again. The bones were prominent under the skin, but the hands themselves were beautiful, long-fingered, and square at the knuckles. They looked like the hands of someone who'd practiced scales when he was 12. I had told Maya not to come. We had made bargains with a clock and cross-country flights before. This time she'd apparently decided the bargain was too mean. She arrived as if the house had been lit to greet her, which, if you measure lighting and attention, was true everywhere she went these days. Jeans, a black sweater, hair pulled back without costume. It was the walk that did it forward, clear awake to any change in the room. She kissed my cheek with a pressure that was both hello and anchor, then turned not to the art, not to the view, but to the people whose choices had made this house necessary. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm Maya Hart." Recognition moved across Charles's face like sunlight across a wall, first faint, then certain. Genevieve's recognition included a ledger. She had seen Maya's name attached to premieres to interviews where my daughter made her arguments with a voice that was fully hers. "We weren't expecting," Genevieve began. "Patterns," Maya said and smiled. "They tell you everything you need to know." She sat beside me uninvited, as if there had always been a chair there waiting for her, and crossed one leg ankle over knee. I saw her choose the smallest, politest version of herself, the one she uses when a panel moderator tries to spill her off the edge of a question. "You must be Mr. Beaumont," she said to Charles, and turned to the other woman. "And Mrs. Beaumont." Her tone wrapped the address in silk and kept a thumb on the knot. "We gave Ellen 30 minutes, Genevieve said. "Then you're already generous," Maya said lightly. "I'll take 5. Her phone lay face down on the table, the case scuffed and ordinary. When she lifted it, the room acquired a screen it didn't know it had. She scrolled, glanced, scrolled again. "On the plane, she said to me, I looked up St. Agnes." She addressed the rest of the sentence to the air between the two of them. "It's remarkable what is public if you know what to ask. Year-end reports. Form 990s. There are decades of notes on major donors. We don't discuss our philanthropy," Genevieve said. "I understand," Maya said. "But your accountants do. So does the law." She swiped. "In 1960, the Beaumont Foundation," she paused, then continued with a dryness I recognized. It's how she says a line when she's privately astonished by its audacity, made a gift of $2.5 million to St. Agnes Children's Home, for children placed due to family exigencies. That phrase appears in quotes as if it were borrowed from a conversation. "Tax strategies were different then," Genevieve said, and the sentence fell between an explanation and a defense. It wasn't the only gift, Maya went on. There was a series. Children's health initiatives in 74, foster care programming in 82 and 84, and endowment in 89. I totaled them. It's just under 26 million in unadjusted dollars. Charles kept his gaze on the cane in his lap. Nothing in his body moved. His stillness felt like preparation, not denial. "We did good," Genevieve said, indicating a category and hoping the category would end the sentence. Maya's voice stayed even. "You did good, and you did not do this." She angled the screen toward them, a black and white photograph that had lived in a metal file cabinet at St. Agnes, one I had never seen the hospital photographer having made his rounds and taken 2 frames of a newborn whose knit cap had slipped to her cheek. The baby's staring seriousness looked familiar in a way that vibrated in my bones. "Where did you find that?" Genevieve's voice, for the first time since I had arrived, sounded made of human material and not porcelain. "St. Agnes digitized their archives 3 years ago," Maya said. "They're proud of their history." Arthur cleared his throat from the doorway, and all of us turned like birds to a sudden sound. "Madam," he said to Genevieve, "Mr. Victor is here." A beat of silence. Even the fountains, it seemed, required instruction to resume. "Now?" Genevieve asked. Arthur did not answer with words. He stepped aside, and a man pushed into the room with the blur of someone who dislikes being second to his own news. He was dressed to suggest he'd been nowhere near perspiration, but his face told a different story. Agitation had started a fire under his collar and worked outward. "Mother," he said. "Father." He stopped when he saw Maya. People stop when they see my daughter. The face they recognize collides with the person in front of them. Then they remember other priorities. "You let them in?" he demanded, and his gaze flicked to Arthur, then back to his parents. "Do you understand what this does?" Victor, Genevieve said, and an entire dictionary of rules attached itself to the name. He did not sit. He paced a short, useless strip of carpet that would have driven a calmer man toward a window. "I got a call 20 minutes ago from our head of security," he said, and I swallowed against a small, unnecessary thought that the phrasing belonged to a movie, and he had stolen it whole. "There have been inquiries, professional inquiries." About what, Charles asked, though the lines at his mouth said he had already guessed. "About the family structure," Victor snapped. "About the foundation. About—" He stopped himself on the lip of a word he seemed to consider proprietary. His attention skittered back to Maya. "Was that you?" Maya's expression was courteous to the point of irony. "I make movies," she said. "I also read." When my mother told me she was coming, I asked my business manager to look into publicly available filings and histories. "She's thorough." She, Victor asked, as if the pronoun itself were an inconvenience. Amara Singh, Maya said. "She used to work in private banking before she decided she preferred artists to spreadsheets." Victor's laugh came out raw. "She preferred the publicity," he said. "This is a stunt. The only stunt I see," Maya said, "is insisting we discuss reality as if it were gossip." She set the phone down gently like a scalpel. "We're in the middle of reality." He ignored her and rounded on me as if I were an imposter in his foyer rather than a woman in a borrowed hour. "What do you want?" he asked. "I can have a lawyer here inside of 10 minutes. I kept my hands open on my knees. "I want to know what happened," I said. "I want the shape of the story." Victor made a noise that landed somewhere between a scoff and a choke. "You come into my parents' home after 67 years and demand—" "Your parents," Maya repeated softly, tilting her head. "That's tidy." The pause that followed was small but decisive, like a chess move that looks harmless until your opponent realizes you've cut off their queen. "If there's a point," Victor said, "make it." "I'm speaking already," Maya replied. He turned back to his father. "We need to contain this," he insisted. "We need to manage it before it becomes something we can't control. We have board meetings stacked from now to next week, and if there's even a rumor—" "About what?" Charles asked again, and this time his voice cut through the air, not loud, not sharp, just finished with the flirtation of euphemism. Victor came to a stop, "about an undisclosed variable." The euphemism tried to do too much work and collapsed under it. I could feel Genevieve's inhale, the kind you take when you know it will be counted. Maya reached for my hand, not a performance, not a pose. Her fingers were warm, and their warmth steadied me against the draft that enters when someone says variable where a person stands. "You're worried about markets," she said to Victor. "I understand markets. They hate surprises they can't price." "You don't understand anything about what we do," he shot back. "Relationships matter. Quiet matters. Continuity matters. This," he gestured at me as if I had been smuggled in under a coat, "blows holes in all three." Those words, Maya said, sound like they belong to a place where nothing has ever gone wrong because everyone agreed to pretend. She looked at Charles. "Is that the place?" He took a long time to answer. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with inventory. When he spoke, the words were modest. "There are rooms in this house built to host agreements," he said. "But they can't keep them." Victor resumed pacing. "Head of security says the questions this morning were specific," he pressed on. "Not just gossip site flares. Someone asked about lines of succession, about eligibility, about—" He struggled again with the vocabulary, and then he chose a bland word as if it could dilute the truth. "About provisions." Maya did not look at me, but I felt the air shift. This was the place in a conversation where fear loves to collect its tithe. I kept my eyes on the lemon tree. A bee had found its way into the room, zipped in a bright diagonal discovered glass, and reconsidered. "Who asked?" Geneviève said not to gossip, but to prepare, which is her way of naming fear. Victor opened his hands. "People who read things for a living," he answered. "People we don't want reading us yet." Charles reached for the tea at last. It had cooled enough to drink. He took a small sip and set the cup down his mouth steady. "Ellen," he said as if the room had narrowed to 2 points. "Why did you knock today and not last year, not 10 years ago?" "Because I could prove it today," I said. "Because I was done asking questions into air." He nodded once, a recognition, not a reward. Arthur hovered in his doorway again and committed the rare act of interrupting on purpose. "There are calls coming in," he told Geneviève, "from the foundation office and from Mr. Kincaid's firm." At the sound of the name, Charles's head tilted as if memory had brushed his cheek. "Take messages," Geneviève said. "Hold all calls, no statements." Arthur inclined his head and disappeared, and the house resumed its role as instrument tuned, resonant, capable of grandeur or whisper depending on the hands. Victor moved to the window and stared at a slice of ocean that refused to be implicated. He tried to make his voice managerial. "This can still be handled," he said, "but not if we pretend we're in a family drama. We are not. We are a structure. Structures need plans." Maya answered him without heat. "I make structures from chaos," she said. "It's called editing." He looked at her as if she'd offered him a pastry when he wanted a vault. "This is not your arena." "It is my mother's," Maya said. His face changed only slightly, like a swimmer's expression shifting when a wave hits differently than expected. He turned from the window, and for one instant we occupied the same air without adversarial charge. Then the house phone rang in some distant room, and he went back to pacing, as if the carpet might with enough friction convert him into a better version of himself. "Enough," Geneviève said, and the words slipped into the room like a blade polished for breakfast. "We will not conduct this shouting match in front of a guest." "I'm not a guest," I said, because sometimes a line needs to be spoken aloud to exist. "I'm the reason you're shouting." No one corrected me. Maya's hand left mine and gathered itself on the table, fingertips aligned as though she were sighting a camera. She addressed no one in particular. "We are here," she said, tone flat, anchoring. "This is the room." Charles closed his eyes and hummed a note so low you might have mistaken it for the house's machinery. When he opened them, his attention had found its place. "Ellen," he said, "what would you have us do in this room?" "Speak plainly," I answered. Genevieve's gaze moved to the lemon tree as if it had been impertinent. "Plain speech has cost," she said, "and so does silence." Maya lifted her phone again and scrolled with her thumb. "Silence has already been expensive," she said. "I can show you line items." Victor's shoulders twitched. I'm calling counsel, he announced and reached for his own phone. We're not proceeding without, Victor, Charles said, and his son, this man I had not met until 3 minutes ago, stopped. The cane tapped once on the stone. We proceed as humans first. Something in Victor's stance caved by a fraction. He did not lower the phone. He did not raise it either. I will answer, Geneviève said, and the room adjusted its posture by instinct. She turned toward me and said each word precisely as if she were building something that would have to hold weight. We were told a child would be a risk to the life we needed. We believed the people who told us that. We made arrangements. We sent funds. She resisted a verb and picked one with enough edge to honor the event severed. The bee at the window found the seam of the sash and slipped through. The room's sound changed by the exact amount of a small creature's freedom. Thank you, I said. Victor stared at me as if I had agreed to nothing. That's it, he demanded. For now, I said, and the answer soothed something in me I hadn't realized was still demanding. Not a victory. A level surface. We sat 3 versions of a story in one rectangle of light. The woman who had sent a child away with checks, the man who had convinced himself the checks were comfort, the woman who had waited out a long winter of not knowing and walked in with her own weather. On the table, the tea had cooled into a fact. On the far side of the glass, the ocean kept its pulse. Then the house phone rang again, closer this time, and Arthur appeared with the practiced neutrality of a diplomat carrying a very small war. Mr. Beaumont, he said to Charles, Mr. Kincaid is on the line for you. Charles didn't reach for the cane. He reached for the phone. Put him through here, he told Arthur. Speaker, please. Arthur crossed to the oak sideboard, tapped a key on the handset, and withdrew with the economy of a stagehand. A breath of line noise, then a voice with the fine gravel of age. Charles. Geneviève. Kincaid, Charles said. We're in the orangery. I'd prefer everyone hear the same words. A small pause, the shuffle of paper. Understood, the voice said. For the record, Daniel Kincaid speaking. Mr. Kincaid, Geneviève said we have guests. So I gather, Kincaid replied. Miss Hart, I presume. Yes, I said. And Miss Hart's daughter, Maya, added. Maya Hart. Another pause. All right, Kincaid said, his tone moving from private counsel to a kind of public address. I'll be plain. Your grandfather, Mr. Beaumont Samuel, established the Beaumont Family Trust in 1952. It was amended several times, tax regimes, asset additions, the usual, but one provision was never altered. We call it colloquially the bloodline clause. The word did not land softly. Victor's jaw worked. Kincaid continued. The clause stipulates that any biological descendant of Samuel or his issue upon satisfactory proof of parentage is a qualified beneficiary with rights equal to any acknowledged child of the same generation. The clause also binds governance, voting rights, board eligibility, and access to the books proportionate to beneficial interest. Genevieve's finger made a brief, controlled adjustment to the cuff of her jacket. We are aware of the language, she said. We were youthful when it was drafted. We have matured. The clause, Kincaid went on, may be removed only by unanimous written consent of all living heirs of the relevant generation. That consent has never been obtained. Indeed, it could not have been obtained if a biological descendant was unknown or unacknowledged. Victor barked a short laugh that had nothing to do with humor. Then it's a trap we set for ourselves 70 years ago. It's a protection Mr. Beaumont set, Kincaid said mildly, against exactly the problem that corrodes family firms' convenience masquerading as policy. Maya's gaze flicked to me. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Kincaid cleared his throat. I have reviewed preliminarily documents forwarded by Ms. Hart's investigator chain of custody on a DNA test, contemporaneous birth record, a plausible path of placement, and I have no reason to doubt authenticity. Full verification would be required naturally. How does that convert? Victor said tightly into numbers. Kincaid shuffled again. The sound was almost comforting, like the rustle of a trustworthy old suit. As of the last quarterly report, he said aggregate trust assets stand at approximately $1.79 billion. The instrument provides that acknowledged heirs of the second generation hold their shares as tenants in common within the trust. If an additional biological heir is verified, the shares reapportion equally among that generation. Victor did the arithmetic faster than anyone else present, but his face betrayed the answer before he spoke. You're telling me my third becomes a half of what it is, he said, and that he nodded toward me, would hold the remainder. More precisely, Kincaid said Mr. Victor's proportional interest would be reduced from 100% of the second-generation pool to 50% with Ms. Hart, entitled to the other 50%. Downstream allocations to third generation would adjust accordingly. And governance, Maya asked. Her tone stayed practical, the voice she uses when a line producer pretends a problem is a weather pattern. Voting seats. The board, Kincaid said, consists of 5 voting directors appointed by the second generation. With 2 beneficiaries, parity would be required. An independent tiebreaker must be appointed by mutual consent. The clause was engineered to discourage internal coups. Samuel was an optimist, Genevieve said dryly. Samuel was a realist, Kincaid returned. If you'll permit the opinion, Genevieve did not answer. Kincaid's voice softened a fraction. I am obliged to tell you all something else. Inquiries were made this morning to the Foundation office and to my firm regarding the scope of the Bloodline Clause eligibility measurements and whether any waivers exist. Those inquiries did not come from tabloids. Victor turned to the window again as if the sea could serve him a strategy. We handle this quickly, he said. We acknowledge nothing. We negotiate. We comply. Charles said the single word ending Victor's sentence as neatly as a door brought flesh to a frame. Victor's phone buzzed. He didn't pick it up. Maya sat forward. Mr. Kincaid, she said, assuming verification is complete, could Ms. Hart assign or disclaim her beneficial interest to a charitable entity of her choosing without taking constructive receipt of distributions? Yes, Kincaid said without theatrics, by deed of assignment to a qualified charitable trust or a 501c3 with appropriate articles. The optics are not my department. The law allows it. Victor made a small, incredulous sound. Optics are very much our department. We understand departments, Maya said. I placed my hands flat on the table. The wood was warm from the afternoon. Mr. Kincaid, I said thank you. I don't need further numbers today. There was a rustle on the line that could have been a nod. I have something to say. I added more to the room than to the phone. Genevieve's attention pivoted with a precision that would have made a metronome jealous. Charles didn't move at all. Presence seemed to be his way of moving. I was placed with Frank and Alma Pike, I said. He worked nights. She cleaned offices. They gave me a lemonade stand on a busted card table and the kind of look that says, "This is yours." They died when I was 19 on their way to see me receive a degree they had no idea how to pronounce. Since then, I have spoken to more managers over returns than doctors over my own bones. I'm not ashamed of any of that. Silence held the room open for me. I came here, I said, for names and for a sentence I could live with. You gave me both. If the math says I am entitled to a share of what your family built, then my instruction is as follows. I looked at the lemon tree for a breath as if a word might be hanging there with the fruit. I will assign my entire beneficial interest present and future to a charitable trust named for Frank and Alma Pike. Its purpose will be to help children in foster care find permanent families. It will be based in Akron. Victor's face went still in the way fury has when it is doing calculations. He began, then stopped, reorganizing the sentence into something that could survive air. You're proposing to give away hundreds of millions of dollars into an instrument we do not control. Correct, I said. And you expect us to applaud. I expect nothing from you, I said evenly, except accuracy when you speak about me, and respect when you speak about the Pikes. Maya did not touch me this time. She didn't need to. The steadiness I felt came from a place that didn't require a hand to locate it. Charles lifted his chin, the smallest admission that something in the room had become visible to him that hadn't been there before. Kincaid cleared his throat. From a procedural standpoint, he said Ms. Hart can execute a deed of assignment immediately upon verification. Governance rights would track with the assignment unless otherwise reserved. If Ms. Hart chooses, she may disclaim certain board authorities while retaining informational access as a matter of record. I recommend counsel on both sides draft with care. Counsel, Victor muttered as if the word were a solvent that might erase the last 2 minutes. Genevieve watched me. You would walk away from this house, she said, and gestured not at the marble and glass, but at some invisible circle that delineated what it meant to belong. After a lifetime, you would leave with nothing. Not nothing, I said, with something better sorted. That is sentiment, Victor said sharply. That is inventory, Maya returned. Arthur appeared again, a faint apology in his posture. Mr. Victor, he said, you have 6 missed calls from security and 2 from Mr. Doherty on the investment side. Victor pressed the heel of his hand to one eye, then the other, and exhaled as if pushing a weight from his chest. He dropped into a chair at last, the first time the furniture had admitted him all afternoon. Let's talk about the foundation. He said to no one and everyone as if the subject could give him shelter. If this circulates as charity rather than scandal, it circulates as truth, Maya said. Spare me, Victor said, then caught himself and stared at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice had some human left in it. We cannot have a press cycle that frames us as villains. Then don't provide the frame, I said. Genevieve's gaze shifted to the phone. Kincaid, she said, draft what is necessary for Ms. Hart to assign her interest to a charitable trust upon verification, quietly. Quietly, Kincaid repeated. I will proceed with discretion, but Genevieve, understand this, an assignment of this magnitude will become public eventually. Filings are filings. I understand, she said. Victor lifted his head. And what about seats, he demanded. You said parity. You expect me to sit across from a stranger who is not a stranger, Charles said. The line of his mouth eased but did not soften. She is your father's granddaughter. The word granddaughter rearranged the air as surely as a window opened. No one answered it. Mr. Kincaid, Maya said to be clear, if Ms. Hart assigns governance rights to the Pike Trust, along with beneficial interests, the trust as an entity would hold the vote. Yes. Yes, Kincaid said, if so drafted. Then the seat is not a chair for a person, Maya said. It's a position for a purpose. Victor stared at her as if the language had been shifted a few inches to the left, and he was deciding whether to follow it there. Genevieve leaned one palm on the table. If there is to be an announcement, she said, it must come from us. Our words. Maya's eyebrows acknowledged the concession without celebrating it. Draft your words, she said. Make them accurate. Am I to include the name Pike? Genevieve asked me. The question was almost gentle. Yes, I said. They fed me. Victor sank back and closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the fight had not left. It had moved to a room behind his face. Kincaid became a stack of protocols again. Ms. Hart, my office will require copies of the DNA report affidavits from the testing chain and an authorization to request the birth record directly from county. We will also engage an independent genealogist to paper the line. Standard in unusual circumstances. If you will provide contact for your investigator. Caleb Ortiz, I said. I'll have him send whatever you need. Very good. Arthur hovered. There is one more matter, he said, looking at Genevieve, but meaning the room. The Foundation office is asking whether to return calls from 2 reporters. They were precise in their questions. Don't return them, Victor snapped. Hold, Genevieve said, and Victor's head whipped toward her. We will neither hide nor grandstand. She looked at me. If we speak, we will not name you until verification is complete. That is your right. It's also ours, Victor said. Maya had gone quiet. When she speaks quietly, she is usually carving. Mr. Kincaid, she said, if Ms. Hart assigns her interest to a charitable trust named for the Pikes and located in Ohio, can the Beaumonts support that assignment formally without creating a conflict? Yes, Kincaid said. A resolution of support carries no legal compulsion but signals cooperation. Thank you, Maya said, and set her phone down face up this time. Her lock screen is a picture of a robin perched on a shopping cart in a parking lot, the sort of image that looks like nothing until you understand who photographed it. Victor glanced at the screen and frowned as if the bird had been recruited to oppose him. Charles took another sip of the tea, now entirely cool, and nodded to himself, like a man who's remembered the rest of a song. Ellen, he said, I will give you any records you ask for. Photograph states even the things that embarrass me. I am too old to preserve my own legend. I met his eyes. I did not smile. Thank you, I said. Genevieve let out the breath she'd been saving. And what do you ask of me? She said the words quiet and costly. Say my name correctly, I said. Say Frank and Alma Pike. Don't say complication. Say decision. When you speak to your mirror, don't remove me. Her hand tightened on the back of the chair, then eased. Kincaid's voice resumed its grain. We'll begin the verification immediately, he said. Ms. Hart, my office will transmit a checklist. Mr. Victor, I expect a call from your side regarding valuation questions and the mechanics of parity. Mrs. Beaumont, I'll prepare a draft assignment instrument with placeholders for the charitable articles. Send me the trust's proposed name when you've settled on it. I have, I said, the Pike Home Trust. Maya looked at me and nodded once a small exact approval. Very good, Kincaid said again. Unless there's anything else There is. Victor cut in. I want a memo on exposure if this goes to the financial press in the next 48 hours. I want it before close of business. You'll have it, Kincaid said. He did not bother to scold the deadline. I'm ringing off. The line went dead with a tone that sounded older than the phone itself. For a moment, no one moved. The afternoon shifted on the wall by a small degree. The ocean kept its square of insistence. Somewhere a gardener's radio found a station and stayed with it. I spoke into the stillness I had made for myself. I don't need a seat at your table, I said. I need the chair with my parents' names on it to be built properly. No one contradicted the engineering. Victor rose. The anger in him had cooled to the temperature of work. He picked up his phone. I'll be in the study, he said, without looking at anyone, and left the room like a man who doesn't want to hear a door close behind him. Genevieve remained. She turned her wedding band once, then again, an old habit or a new one learning to look old. Ellen, she said, would you like the photograph we have the hospital Polaroid? Yes, I said, if you're offering it, not as payment, as accuracy. She inclined her head. Maya stood and pushed in her chair. We'll coordinate with Mr. Kincaid, she said. It wasn't a vow. It was a calendar entry. Arthur waited at the threshold. The house perfectly trained made room for departure or return without expressing a preference. Charles looked at me a long time as if he were memorizing me into the kind of memory that survives housekeeping. Thank you for knocking, he said. I always was going to, I answered. He seemed to understand that I meant the sentence exactly as it sounded. We let the quiet land. The lemons shone like small patient suns, and the bee did not come back. No one announced the end of the meeting. It arrived the way fog does quietly, and then all at once. Arthur returned with a slim cream folder and a small archival box, the color of pale wheat. He placed the folder before Genevieve and set the box in front of me, careful as a man putting down a sleeping bird. The photograph, he said, and a draft. Genevieve opened the folder. A single page lay inside, dense with careful sentences. She read in silence, the ring on her right hand turning once, then stopping. Charles leaned in. His finger traced no words, yet paused where names appeared as if heat still lived in the letters. "Read it aloud," he told her. She did. Her voice had none of the grandeur it wore in public rooms. It sounded like a woman ensuring that every word entered the air in the right order. The Beaumont family acknowledges with gratitude the reunion with Ellen Hart, daughter of Genevieve and Charles Beaumont, born in January 1958 and placed for adoption during a difficult period for two young parents. We are proud of the life Ms. Hart has built and honored to support her decision to assign her interest to the Pike Home Trust, a charitable entity named for Frank and Alma Pike, whose home shaped her early years. The family extends thanks to the communities that sustain Ms. Hart and to the institutions that maintain records with care. We request privacy for all parties as standard verification proceeds. She finished. The room was very still. Add Akron, I said, not as ornament, as a dress. Genevieve nodded and marked the margin without disguise. The pen made an ordinary scratch that sounded stranger than any number we had spoken. And mine, Maya said. Include Ellen Hart again at the end. Not Ms. Hart. The sentence should know her name. Genevieve wrote that too. Charles reached for the archival box and slid it toward me. Its lid lifted with a faint sigh. Inside lay a paper envelope and a Polaroid whose white border had gone the color of old linen. The baby stared affronted and solemn as newborns sometimes do when they meet fluorescent light. Genevieve did not look away while I held it. We kept only the one she said. It lived between 2 pages of a cookbook. Third shelf. We hid many things there under recipes. She said it like a ledger entry. I slid the Polaroid into the envelope and closed the flap with my thumb. Thank you, I said. Maya stood, then sat again, as if to give the moment another second's width. One more correction, she said to Genevieve, tapping the page lightly. Strike difficult period. The phrase works too hard. Try at the time. Genevieve crossed out the words without protest. The line looked like something finally allowed to be ordinary. Victor reappeared in the doorway, a different weather fastened to his face. The pacing energy had burned through. What remained was an expensive fatigue. He took in the scene, the box, the page, my hands, and chose a voice I hadn't heard from him yet. Is there language? He asked. We have a draft, Genevieve said, and offered the page. He read. The crease between his brows deepened at nothing and everything. When he reached the line with the Pikes' names, it deepened again, then smoothed. This will run, he said. It will be posted, Genevieve corrected. Running belongs to others. He passed the sheet to Charles, who signed beneath the typed names without theater. Genevieve signed after him. Victor hesitated, then added his name not as capitulation, but as a sentence he preferred to say himself. Arthur produced a notary stamp as if conjured, set it beside the page, and withdrew into invisibility again. Make sure the foundation calls are returned after this goes up, Genevieve told him. Not before. Yes, madam. I kept the envelope on my lap, not hidden, not displayed. The photo lent the air of very small warmth, like a pocket of sun in winter. Charles turned his chair to face me more fully. Will you require transport? He asked. Arthur can arrange something unobtrusive. I have a car, I said. It knows the way to the coast road. You'll take the photograph, Genevieve said, as if testing the fact a second time. I will. She nodded once. May I? She stopped and adjusted the question. May we have a copy when you make one? Yes, I said. Maya rose. We should go, Mom. The word Mom reshaped the room. It didn't erase anything. It simply added a chair where one had been missing. Victor stepped aside to let us pass. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I'll review the trust language with Kincaid. Do that, Genevieve said, not to approve or dismiss, but to set the words where they belonged. We crossed the hall of paintings and stone. The house had learned us by now. Lights breathed on and dimmed without calling attention to their obedience. On the threshold, Arthur held out a simple business card, not embossed, not fussy. A direct line, a name written by hand, Arthur Selby. In case the copy service asks for proof of chain, he said. Or in case you require a courier you don't wish to explain. Thank you, Maya said. She tucks practical kindnesses into the same pocket as receipts. Nothing in that pocket gets lost. The Pacific met us with its salted breath. A wind had come up off the water and combed the cypress into dark commas. The car blinked awake at the button on Maya's key. She opened the passenger door for me, the way she did when she was 19, and we were sharing a scrapyard sedan with a misaligned door that needed coaxing. I settled the envelope on my knees and put my hand on top of it. We didn't speak until the iron gates had given us back to the road. I counted 3 different versions of Victor in there, Maya said at last. All of them loud. Noise is a kind of strategy, I said. Silence too, she said, and smiled with one corner of her mouth. We drove south a few miles before she pulled into a turnout overlooking a strip of beach stitched white with foam. The wind found our faces as soon as we opened the doors. From this distance, the house was a suggestion, a bright idea softened by distance. Maya leaned against the hood and watched the water. "Do you want to call Caleb?" she asked. "In a minute," I said. She waited. Waiting is one of her best tools. I opened the envelope and slid the Polaroid out again. The baby's mouth was a stern little dash. The knit cap had been tugged low, a tiny mistake that made the picture braver. The corner had a fingerprint pressed into it long ago, an oval of oils now the color of tea. "Mom," Maya said, "may I?" I handed it to her. She held it at arm's length the way we both do when something is too close to read. Then she lowered it and studied my face with the same care, as if making sure the same person lived in both places. "Hungry," she decided. "This is a hungry baby." I said, "always have been." She returned the photo to its sleeve with the same precision Geneviève had used on her sentences. "Let's go into town," she said. "Find a place that makes copies on the spot. The kind with a bell above the door and a clerk who knows how to fix a jammed tray." "That clerk is a saint," I said. "He is," she agreed, starting the car. "He saves the world one toner cartridge at a time." We turned back to the highway. In the rear view, the sea kept a steady line. The road rose and sloped, shouldered by eucalyptus. For a mile, neither of us said anything. It wasn't a lack. It was room. My phone buzzed once, a text from a number Caleb had used for confidential updates. "Call when ready. I'll line up county records. Proud of you." I slid the phone back in my bag without answering. The pride could wait on its feet for a few minutes. At a light in the village, Maya reached over and took my hand. Not a ceremony, more like a checkmark. "Hungry?" she asked. "For food, yes. For anything else?" "For duplicates," I said. "For envelopes. For a stapler that bites evenly." She laughed. We parked beside a storefront where 2 beach chairs were set like punctuation under a striped awning. A bell announced our entry with comic devotion. The clerk looked up from a laminator and said, "Be right with you," in a voice built for library desks and summer movie theaters. We made the copies. He slid them into paper sleeves with tissue, treating the damp Polaroid as if it might crash through a floor if he breathed on it too hard. He dated the receipt in neat blue numbers and put a dot over each numeral that could be mistaken. Back in the car, we labeled the backs in pencil. Original EH, Safa, copy GB, copy file. Maya's block letters were steadier than mine. She blew gently on the graphite and watched it settle. On the drive inland, the ocean fell away to fields the color of toast. A radio station found us and sang something from 20 years ago. I didn't know the words, but I knew how to hum. We passed a roadside stand selling lemons in a basket with an honor jar beside it. Maya eased onto the shoulder and set a $5 bill under the rock that kept the lid from skittering. I added a single shiny fruit to the envelope box, as if that too could belong to a file. She pulled back onto the road. The afternoon tilted toward evening by imperceptible clicks. When we reached the on-ramp, she checked her mirrors and merged. The car steadied into the lane. The envelope was warm against my palm. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.